And good evening or good morning to our friends in Australia, and good afternoon on the West Coast. I'm Zev Yaroslavsky, and I'm sitting in for Janice Resnick, who's has earned a special few days on the road, and she couldn't be with us tonight. It's a pleasure and an honor to welcome you on behalf of the members of our America at a Crossroads leadership team, which alongside me includes former Congressman Mel Levine and Janice Kaminer-Resnick. A warm welcome and many thanks to Harry Litman for joining us tonight. We're all eager to hear his insights on the current state of our legal system, and there's a lot of news on that just hours ago. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts on the question, can our justice system weather the current storm? Of course, we also want to extend our gratitude to today's moderator, the exceptional award-winning Patt Morrison. Looking ahead to next week, Wednesday, April 2nd, a week from tonight, 5 o'clock Pacific time, we'll be welcoming back Ambassador Dennis Ross. Ambassador Ross has served under 4 United States presidents and has unparalleled diplomatic experience spanning over 40 years. He will be discussing statecraft, Donald Trump, the prospects for the Middle East, and U.S. foreign policy in 2025. Aside from everything else, Dennis Ross is a UCLA Bruin. It's a timely and critical discussion, and he'll be in conversation next week with Larry Mantle as he celebrates his 40th anniversary on radio, public radio here in Southern California. Be sure to sign up for all our exciting April and May programs through the email you'll receive right after tonight's event. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the remarkable Patt Morrison, winner of multiple Emmys, Golden Mikes, and part of a Pulitzer Prize that she won for the Los Angeles Times. Patt is a true institution in Southern California with a distinguished decades-long career as a journalist across TV, radio, and print. We are deeply grateful for Pat's ongoing contributions as one of our regular moderators for America at a Crossroads, and she will introduce our guest. Patt, the floor is all yours.
Dev, thank you so much. And thank you, all of you who have tuned in to watch this week. It seems that every week we can fairly say that we are at a critical crossroads in this country, and there's nothing truer about that than the state of the courts and the challenges that are being put to them. Harry Litman joins us, as you heard. You will find him now at harrylitman.substack.com, so you can read at length what it is he thinks about issues as they develop, even during the course of a single day. He is a former U.S. Attorney and Deputy Assistant Attorney General, creator and executive producer of the podcast Talking Feds, a senior fellow at the USC Annenberg Center, expert in constitutional law and the justice system. And of course, you hear him regularly on MSNBC, CNN, CBS, NPR, at Talking San Diego, and a founding contributor to Contrarian. So there are many places you can hear Harry Litman. Tonight, we get him for an hour on our own, and we're thankful that he can join us. Thank you so much.
Pat, it's a real pleasure. When Janice first reached out to me, she mentioned Erwin Chemerinsky, and that was good enough for me. But I subsequently learned what a fantastic event this is and in what distinguished company I am just being a guest. So I'm really looking forward to it and hope I make the mark.
Well, and we hope you'll be back again because there will be much to talk about. Maybe not all to the good, but we'll hear more about that. What we're going to get to a little later is really the thin red line question on everybody's minds. What if Trump decides to defy the federal courts? But let's put together the base of that pyramid and see where we are. Just this afternoon, a federal appeals court refused to let the Trump administration keep deporting migrants swiftly using a rarely invoked wartime power while this litigation is pending. They were appealing a decision by Judge James Boasberg, who had ruled in the past several times for Donald Trump, but having ruled against him, Donald Trump called him all kinds of names. The federal government, the Trump administration played kind of cutesy and fast and loose in Judge Boasberg's courtroom. But you can tell us, first of all, the meaning of this Court of Appeals decision, and then the broader context of what Judge Boasberg was discussing and how it fits into a question of presidential authority.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, so it's quite important, even though it's very specific. So Judge Boasberg entered a temporary restraining order for 14 days. That's typically hard to disturb, but you can if there's an emergency, and the Trump administration loves to say there's an emergency. They went up to the Court of Appeals and to try to say, dissolve his temporary restraining order. And the oral argument was just a couple days ago, and people who listened to it, it seemed pretty clear there was going to be one judge, a Clinton appointee, who was going to be against the administration. Another, a Trump appointee, was going to be for. But then a third, the presiding judge, Judge Henderson, was Delphic and really kept her own counsel. And she's a Republican, as I said, but also very strong, very hawkish on national security. On the other hand, the merits here seem so strong to just be able to say there's enough likelihood the plaintiffs will win to freeze the linebackers, as it were. And this opinion was, when it came out today, emphatic as written by Judge Henderson. So besides the specific context of it, the overall rhetorical oomph of it by a Republican judge on the DC circuit, I thought was really sort of promising. She made clear, look, it's not there. The administration, and this is a kind of cross-cutting theme of theirs, is trying to say you just have to intone the words national security, and the judges have to completely close up shop. And she was very strong. Millett, the Clinton appointee, was even stronger in a concurring opinion. But Henderson, it was a breath of fresh air and real relief to see. And she said, look, for just starters, there seem to be people who have been shipped to have been disappeared to El Salvador, and really there are, we know of some, but there may be others that it for whom it's the ultimate kind of Kafka-esque nightmare. They're there. We may never hear from them again. Really, that's what we're talking about. And everyone seemed to acknowledge, including at oral argument, there must be some avenue for review there. But also, Trump's very invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. He is saying it's only been invoked 3 times in wars,
Over
1812.
225 plus years.
That's right. And he was invoking it, and you have to either be in a declared war, no, 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 or there is a predatory incursion by a foreign country. This is the worry in 1798 with France. They would send, some people over to kind of make trouble. So this is what he was saying. These members of a transnational drug group are the equivalent of a foreign government invading or in an incursion of us. And Henderson was very clear. This is down the middle what judges do. We're not going to take your word for it. And there's the big Supreme Court case we'll be hearing about more. And the big money quote from it says, review is constrained, but not as to construction and interpretation of the statute. So not simply saying, we won't give you this extraordinary remedy of dissolving the TRO, but laying down the principle. Your interpretation is subject to judicial review, whether the people you have sent to El Salvador are really members of the group. That's subject to judicial review. And even though it's in this procedural preliminary context, the articulation so forcefully of those principles by a Republican judge on the DC circuit was a really heartening development.
We want to remind all of you who are watching that you can put your questions in the Q&A box, and a little later in the hour, we'll start getting to your questions that we can put to Harry Litman. It's extraordinary in many ways, and you start in Judge Boasberg's courtroom, where the judge began asking the Trump administration for details and information and was just getting the runaround. He was getting blown off. He was told, oh, that's picayune, Judge. You don't need to know that sort of thing. You don't sass a federal judge like that.
Well, except they've given him the ultimate sass. They say all those things, Pat. You're exactly right. These shifting kind of explanations, and then they just sort of coyly introduce the idea midweek, where they're having these daily skirmishes and they're saying nothing. If we did this, we might have to invoke the state secrets privilege. I'll get back to what that is in a moment. But he said to them, "Okay, are you or aren't you?" And the next day, they file another brief that says nothing, and they say, we can't figure out yet if we're going to. And then on Monday, they play what they think is the ultimate trump card, the state secret privilege. Now, that is a doctrine. It's a privilege, that, like any other privilege, like you have with your spouse or you have with a lawyer. And all it means is evidence can't be introduced in open court. A jury can't hear it. And this, in the state secret privilege, normally the United States claims it because they don't want information being made public. They're claiming it here to say Judge Boasberg, who, by the way, was the presiding judge in the FISA court that every day deals with classified information, as you say, has really respected on both sides of the aisle. He was the law school roommate, by the way, of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. All he said is, I want to know, to look at this information classified to know myself if you violated my order. And I wrote about this in the Substack this week. I think it's a really good thing that he's so dogged about it. He's getting just trashed. Not just him, his wife, his daughter, sort of tawdry bullying by the Trump administration, and the danger that a sort of lone wolf Trump fan would do. He's got all kinds of security now, but he's sticking to it. Now they have played that card, and it's the same thing as I was just talking about. They
Yeah.
want to say, once we've said that, end of story, you can't even inquire into it.
Well,
Yeah.
let me ask whether you have a
Yeah.
sense that this is going to be the way that the Trump administration is dealing with virtually any case that comes to the court. It's going to hem and haw, it's going to dig its toe in the dirt, and then it's finally going to say national security.
Or I don't even know, that here they're finally saying state secret. But I think they're going to come out of the box with national security you can't review. Let me give you a very good example from today and yesterday. This stuff where they've blacklisted law firms. What have they said? That what the president's proclamation has said, that we know why really he just blackballed Jenner Block, because for a couple months, Andrew Weissman, who very validly participated in the Mueller case, was hired by them when he returned out of practice. That's the real reason. But what is he saying? He's actually saying, and he said this about Covington, he said this about Perkins Coie, they are threatening national security for really no reason, and it's a joke. But when the administration lawyer, who's the chief of staff for Attorney General Pam Bondi, got up, that was the submission, and that's what they're going to say at the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. You cannot question it. If the president mouths the words national security, that is the end of the story. And there's doctrine, Pat, to that effect, but it's an Alice in Wonderland application here because, among other things, not to be too delicate about it, you have a president who lies promiscuously. So what do you do in that situation? Is the law an ass by saying you can't second guess what everybody knows is actually not even true? And
That
that's going to be the real question in the Supreme Court of the United States on this stuff. Can
the
you just say it and make judges back up? And so
that
far,
I'm
one
sorry.
more sentence. So far on exactly this Alien Enemies Act, the courts, they've been great. They've basically said, no, you can't, we need some kind of judicial review. We won't take your say-so.
The law is an ass, that great line from Dickens, but you also have this president with the sense of magical thinking that, oh, all those boxes in Mar-a-Lago, I just declared them all to be non-secret,
Right.
non-classified any longer.
You
So
know who
you
backed him up
mentioned
on
that
that, by the way? Cash Patel. A total lie. Anyway, go ahead.
anyway. So you mentioned the what's going on with some of the law firms, and Paul Weiss is the one that came to, and let's set that back a little. Paul
Yeah.
Weiss is a significant law firm, one that has raised money for Democrats among some of its partners. It has defended Democratic causes. It has gone to court against the Trump administration. And the Trump administration, Donald Trump, issued an executive order against this law firm that would have banned it from virtually even practicing in federal courts, that would have denied any access to classified information that it needed to defend its clients. And the Paul Weiss firm, the head of the Paul Weiss firm, went into the Oval Office and came away agreeing under this executive order to give $40 million in pro bono legal services to issues the president has championed to stop DEI practices, as they were called, within the firm. This has created a furor among big legal firms because another firm you mentioned, Perkins Co., covered by the same issue has said, no, we're not going to back down, because the Trump administration hates it when it loses in court, but now it's trying not to be taken into court at all by some of these major firms who have significant chops when it comes to dealing with this administration.
It's stunning. I think the technical legal word I can use in this gathering is it is a shanda that Paul Weiss and the real machers, but one of the top 5 firms in the country, that they capitulated to this. It's just a shakedown racket, right? There's no possible um, validation that they're somehow threatening national security. And there's 2 things I really want to say about this that makes it even extraordinary in the context of expansive assertions of executive power. First, all these things. This is just personal reprisal. It's quite clear. What did Perkins Coie do? They were Democrats in against him. What did Covington do? Oh my gosh, they represented Jack Smith. And what did the most recent firm do? Jenner Block. They hired Andrew Weissman. So first, not even a question of any valid executive power. This is just, him doing total reprisals. And then second, and really scary. I mean, I was really, really alarmed at the prospect that he would come into office in Project 2025. But first of all, it's been with blazing speed. But this is his getting his tentacles into big law. He's also done it with the academy. He's also done it with media. In other words, elements of civil society and important ones. And this is really out of the authoritarian playbook in places like Hungary. So he's managed in just a flat out shakedown. I know what went on. I talked to some of the people in these firms. They're just scared that clients won't retain them. And so, he's really putting that kind of leverage on them. But to be able to influence, he's told, Colombia has also bent knee and said, we won't do this, that, or the other.
For
And it's not
$400,
even the
400 million.
expansive, over assertive use of executive power, really. It's just flat out threats and a kind of protection racket, influencing the behavior of some of our biggest institutions that affect everyday life. It's not just the government. Both
So
those things make it really head spinning, I think, Pat.
it was not a shock in a way to see Trump do this, because we know how vindictive he is, and
Yeah.
we know that he thinks that any personal affront to him needs to be aggressively
Yeah.
addressed. But it was shocking to see a major law firm do what Paul Weiss did. But what do you think is going to happen in the courts when you've got firms like Perkins Coie standing up and saying, we're not going to follow what Paul Weiss did. We're going to stand up to Trump?
I think they'll win. And in the good day that today was in the court, you have a very strong opinion from the judge in that case, Pat, who just responded with contempt to a motion that she should be recused because she's previously ruled against the Trump administration. This is Beryl Howe. I think the claims under the First Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, I mean, it's really depriving their clients of a right to counsel. I think there's several problems with it constitutionally, but here's the real rub. Let's say they win, and I think they will. Where are they left? You're still looking at the big clients. All 25 of their biggest clients work with the federal government, and those clients are saying, okay, we have a big matter here. We could go with Perkins Coie, and they've been vindicated, or we can go with fill in the blank. And the sense that this vindictive, petty man is in the Oval Office, and even though he was unsuccessful in putting them in blackballing them, as you say, that just redoubles his vindictiveness. So I think for Perkins Coie, they were in a terrible spot, and they've done the right thing by fighting it. Really, the right thing would be if all 100 of the biggest firms in the country fought it together. I also think that besides the shame of it for Paul Weiss, they're going to be hurt also. Once he does this thing, there's no good result for law firms. Students are, they're not going to be able to recruit well. They've already had a departure of some of their younger staff who are appalled. And of course, their peace with Trump is only as good as the next transgression as he perceives it. So I think Perkins Coie will win, but it just there's so much that he's doing, even if it's reversed, still leaves a mess. That's the same with the provisional employees. Order them back. The basic principle here is it's easy to bust things up and hard to restore them.
I
So
think you
I
used
think
the phrase
Perkins
Humpty
Coie is
Dumpty.
in really serious, even existential danger, even though they're right, and I think will be vindicated in the court.
Another matter which is creating chaos is the degree of power and authority which Donald Trump has given to DOGE, to Elon Musk, without any clear sense of who is this man, what is his authority, how does he find himself accountable, if at all, with all of the actions that he has been taken, where you've got people literally breaking into government offices and defying officials of government departments, executive departments, to take documents, to take information that now the courts are deciding whether or not they're entitled to. Some courts have said, not only do you not have it, you have to destroy it and give me proof that you have destroyed it. Who are these people, and under what color of authority are they acting?
Pat, he's just an informal advisor. Why are you making such a big deal about this? Um, they not only show up and say, "Where do I plug this in?" And the law-abiding people say, "You are not permitted." And then the next day, honest to God, those law-abiding people are fired. If they even resist the lawless demands of DOGE. Yeah, right. The administration more here than anywhere is talking out of both sides of its mouth. Really, Trump, I mean, he just yesterday's in the cabinet meeting again, the joint session, everything. Doge is basically, as best I can tell, the sort of COO of the country, and Trump, we're learning more and more, isn't around for some of the big things. So maybe that makes him literally top dog. And really, who the hell is he? Leaving for just a second, besides the legal problem, which I'll get to in a moment, what makes people think or Trump think that he's for some reason he seems to have been a visionary. I don't begrudge him that, but what skill does he have to, figure out these personnel matters in the federal government or who should go and who should not? The mess is really at his feet for his slap happy, completely thoughtless kind of ravaging of the federal government. But there's a really important point here, and that's why in court they say, I'll bet nobody here, well, maybe it's a very big and very sophisticated audience. I bet very few people here could name the head of DOGE. It's this woman whose name no one has heard of and who's on the actually official rolls as an HHS employee. But
And I
she's
think
the
she wouldn't
one they're
surprise
claiming
as
in
anybody
court is
else.
running DOGE, and Musk
Yeah.
is just informal advisor. Why did they do that? Because there's a very strong challenge that's happening in three different courts. And it's a principle under the law that says a really important um, assistant to the president, so a so-called principal officer, like cabinet members, must be nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. We must have that double kind of accountability. And that's basically what the definition is. If he doesn't have anyone between him and the president, he fits that classic definition. And people have come in and said, there's an appointments clause. That's the clause I'm talking about. Problem. He's got to be nominated and confirmed. And the law suggests that if courts agree and it goes up to the Supreme Court, and this one probably would, everything he's done goes by the boards. But it's just as we were saying with Perkins Coie. What would it mean if just today the Supreme Court said, we agree, appointments clause violation. He's been illegit from the start. Get him out of there and undo it all. Talk about a mess, right? Undo it all. What does that mean? The employees who've been kicked out somehow come back into a hostile department where someone's at their desk. Undo it all. The private information that's been leaked, reseal it. It doesn't work that way. So we're already pretty far down the road under the real serious control or at least authority of someone who maybe has no business being there at all. He's just this, guy that Trump has put in there and ha is exercising kind of breathtaking authority. It's pretty clear that all the and you can see as they've been, led like trained seals in the cabinet meetings that they all have to suck up to him at the command of Trump. He is above the cabinet. It's like crazy.
It's also collaterally created a circumstance where you have the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, saying that attacks on Tesla and Musk are domestic terrorism. So essentially, she's singling out a car salesman and his cars to create, a carve out in law and in prosecution,
Hey,
which
not just him, the president was selling them on the White House lawn.
that's yes.
Tesla's got a lot of credibility with the government, we know. Yeah.
So there's your collateral, because as long as this goes on, there's going to be more and more of a ripple effect that will be very, very difficult to stop and to try to repair.
I know we got a lot of questions. Can I give you 30 seconds on the Bondi
Please, yes.
prosecution? So, look, these are crimes. People who do Molotov cocktails at Tesla factories, they're crimes. They're arson. Those are federal crimes. But man, oh man, first there's kind of an irony after letting all of the January 6th true domestic terrorists go, that Pam Bondi would stand up and beat her breast at the she is so tone deaf in general. She's just not, doesn't act like an attorney general should. At this stage, you just summarize the allegations. No, she, says the days of doing and getting away with it are over, but she's making this domestic terrorism argument. You can add, it's not a freestanding charge, but you can add that to the arson case, ups the penalties quite a bit, but they could really be snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Because what does it mean? It means you are trying to intimidate the population for political reasons. That's what terrorists do. And certainly the bomb throwers at the Tesla plants, I think, are trying to make a statement or trying to push back and protest against Tesla. Are we really thinking, beyond a reasonable doubt, no less, that what they're trying to do is intimidate the civilian population? I think she'd be biting off more than she can chew, and if she goes down that road, a jury is gonna punish her for it.
Just within the past week, we had something extraordinary happen where Chief Justice John Roberts publicly rebuked the Trump administration's calls to impeach a judge, Judge Boasberg, over these rulings over the migrant deportations. For more than 2 centuries, it has been established, she said, that impeachment is not an appropriate response of disagreement concerning a judicial decision. A normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. It seemed kind of eyebrow raising to the rest of the world. How did it read in the legal community?
Eyebrows to the very back of the head, if they can be raised that far. Look, I clerked up there. I teach about the court. I know the court pretty well. This is stunning. There's no precedent for a chief justice will talk in court, will talk at where required to do so, like if presiding over impeachment or giving an address to Congress. A freestanding sua sponte, as the judges would say, just statement like this about a political subject entering into the political fray like this, deafening. Deafening. And a couple other points to do. It happened just like a couple hours after Trump's statement. And it had to be done. He would not have issued it alone. He didn't have to get all 9 to sign off, but other justices had to be similarly appalled. And which augurs poorly, and they were. So this was a seismic event within sort of legal and especially Supreme Court culture, which the administration proceeded completely to ignore, right? Talk about and that they will need him. I mean, Roberts in particular, maybe we'll talk more about this, but Roberts is absolutely the pivot point of whether these extravagant claims of national security and therefore extravagant expanses of executive power will fly. He says this thing and they don't have the sense to shut up. The next day, Trump does a fundraising announcement talking about impeachment. Elon Musk, the visionary imbecile, gives the maximum amount of money, throws his money around to the seven members of the House who have called for impeachment, supporting it in the most robust way he can. And they've continued to trash Boasberg, who's the one they called for the impeachment of, to the current day. So either they're just so dead set on winning that they're, cutting off their nose to spite their face, or they are completely, I really want to say objectively, obviously my colors are showing a little, but this is not a sophisticated crowd legally. Pam Bondi is not a sophisticated actor. Donald Trump doesn't know the first thing about not just the Constitution, but about legal culture. But for the Chief Justice to make that proclamation and have them continue to act as they have and basically thumb their nose at him, it's heart-stopping for me as someone who knows the court, but also I just got to think it's
Is
idiotic
very,
for
very,
them.
very briefly, is just Chief Justice Roberts' message directed also to other federal judges as kind of a hang in there, and to his own court?
Right. And by the way, he's worried about physical risk of, I mean, actually, right? We got 700 plus federal judges, and these are completely, this to me, it was really mainly a Trump. It's like January 6th dynamic to me, Pat. As he fans the flames, it increases the danger on federal judges. And we had a judge whose kid was killed. Whether it's about this or not, we certainly have Boasberg himself, his daughter got the Domino's pizza treatment, which is another way of saying we know where you live. It's just so beyond the pale. And there is, one of these days, like somebody could really get hurt. And for Trump to be fanning the flames as opposed to saying, as January 6th, do not do anything violent. Let's not be stupid. We can express our opposition to the court respectfully and peacefully, but he's not. And if something bad happens, he's a but for cause. That might not be legally, he might not, well, we know already he can't be criminally prosecuted for almost anything. But, it's a terrible dereliction of duty. He is really endangering judges around the country. It's
It, it,
despicable.
it was alarming to me that
Yeah.
the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, drew attention to Congress' power over the federal judiciary. He wouldn't have characterized it as a threat. We do have authority over the federal courts. He said we can eliminate an entire district court, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and Congress is going to act. What is that but a legislative incursion beyond perhaps its brief into what it is that the judiciary does?
Yeah, I got no answer for you. It's saber rattling, and let's understand what it is, because you could see they were chastising. You had a series of Republican lawmakers come out, and they honestly don't know the first thing. First, as I sort of said in context with the DC Circuit opinion, all Boasberg has done here, all he's done here is say, looks like it could be funky. I'm going to stop things for 14 days to decide. That is so uncontroversial with the outlandish interpretations and the dangerous to individuals that he is being confronted with. So, based on that, the Know Nothing press secretary, Trump, Elon Musk, but the members of the Senate and House are the strongest acolytes. Now what they're saying is he's legislating from the bench. If they ask the follow-up question, they wouldn't have the first idea of what they should say. He's not legislating from the bench. He's applying the law in a really very sort of prudent, thoughtful, uncontroversial way if you just look at the law. So they're just saying this crap and following these labels, including Mike Johnson, including Ted Cruz and others who should know better. And it's, completely, it's anything from ignorant to a bald-faced lie. But there's nothing he's done that's controversial. And this goes more generally, like when Pam Bondi comes in and says there have been weaponized prosecutions. Really? Like which one? So I guess you're saying they didn't have the facts and the law for some of these prosecutions of Trump, because that's what it would mean. They couldn't name a single one. It's just a label that they say again and again and again, and they hope will stick. And
Like
one
fake news.
last point, since I'm mad today, is the other side, doing justice without fear or favor means if you have the proof, you go forward. It doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump. It also means that you investigate it without fear or favor. And I just want to say the leak here, the signal chat debacle. I've talked to Malcolm Nance and others at length. It seems to be about as serious a breach as anyone has ever heard of, and I am 100% certain in any other administration there would right now be an FBI investigation and an envelope that says 793F, Espionage Act, and has, among others, Pete Hegseth on it. And if we don't see that, and they are in the tank, that means really fallen far already in
Okay.
this breathtaking 2 months from doing justice without
We have a lot of questions and I'd like to get to them.
I'm sorry.
But just to interject and so
Please,
we can round
always
robin
feel
through
free to
these.
slap me
It's
around. It's
okay.
okay. I
But
go
it
on
seems,
sometimes.
and I'm not asking for your comment on this. My comment is it seems paradoxical that the Trump administration is going to court saying national security about everything except this conversation about an airstrike
Right.
against the Houthis was not classified at all. So here's a
Right.
question from a retired judge in Los Angeles. He says, I'm terrified by the unwillingness of the executive and apparently the legislative branch in respecting the orders of the judiciary. Your thoughts about, and we knew we were coming to this, the ongoing conflict, the forthcoming conflict, the tripwire that's going to be when the judiciary asserts its authority and the Trump administration says, no, we don't need to do that. That's the nuclear option.
Great question. $64,000 question. And the reason that I think it'd be really good if Boasberg could get to this point now, in this case, with this judge and that kind of setting. They're going to do one of two things, it seems to me. They might, at a minimum, they already are kind of obfuscating, bobbing and weaving, saying the dog ate it and the like, but not exactly ever calling out that, like, although Tom Homan and others are saying it, that, like, you know, screw you, judiciary. If that happens, it'll be a matter of management and what things look like on the other side. I agree with you. There's a palpable chance that they actually get, say, well, you've made your order, now you can go enforce it. And I mean, these are war games exercises. What happens to the Marshal Service that serves the judges, but actually works for the executive, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm here to tell you, I think at that point, and I've thought about it seriously, I don't think I'm being alarmist. We're talking the remaining guardrails are state power and state AGs and the people and popular opposition. Some people think we're not at the real crisis. It's the $32,000 question if they violate district court orders and 64,000 if they violate the Supreme Court. I don't know. Absolute knowing violations of a district court order strikes me that we are at the crisis point. But literally, as you think about it, he has so sewn up things. You've got a totally pliant, as you say, Your Honor, from LA, Congress, the Army. Remember, Mark Milley would have been there in 2020, so gotten rid of him, done so much to get rid of his enemies, put in a toady at U.S. Marshal Service. And I think if it really comes to that, they are saying, we're going authoritarian. Hungary, here we come. And at that point, we're talking about popular opposition and maybe state powers to try to counteract.
So it is the plan, as it seems, for the Trump administration to try to bowl over the district and appeals courts and go right to the Supreme Court, thinking the Supreme Court is going to give it everything it wants, which is by no means certain.
It's by no means certain, but it's a more congenial place, right? Look at the immunity opinion, and they got to win there anyway. So they know their chances are better. They're getting clobbered in the district courts, right? There've been over 100 cases filed and 80 some injunctions, and the percentages of ruling against them almost as high by Republican appointed judges as Democrat appointed judges. All their money has to be in the Supreme Court. And let me tell you, I'm really scared of the Supreme Court because this abstract point we were talking about again and again, can he just claim national security and everybody has to shut up?
Hmm.
I think there are two or three, maybe four votes in the Supreme Court for something like that. The more sort of abstract, well, you just can't second guess the executive, which I think would be a doctrinal disaster and a practical disaster would so would give him such a license to infringe on all of our liberties. But yes, they're going to want the Supreme Court, and they abuse that way more than any other administration. They call emergency and run there. They've done it already with the U.S. aid case. It's up there now, and they like their chances there better.
Okay, let's get to some more questions, and one of them
Yep.
would have to do with something that is close to Trump's heart and to at least a couple of justices on the Supreme Court is challenging New York Times versus Sullivan. The idea that if you make an honest mistake in a news story, that is not actionable. It has to be actual malice. Well, Steve Wynn, the casino owner and a big friend of Donald Trump's, took his case to the Supreme Court. The Associated Press reported on sexual misconduct allegations. He didn't like that. And the Supreme Court turned him away. Is this like live to fight another day, or does that show how the Supreme Court might be feeling about this issue completely?
No, it is live to fight another day. This is a common thing by Supreme Court judges. Denying cert means nothing. They could wait for another case. Nevertheless, and I've got a fairly jaundiced view of Trump, and I'm pretty nervous about the Supreme Court. This one, I think, is a bridge too far. Thomas has said, this is the canonical New York Times v. Sullivan from 1964. It protects the press. Without it, England is a good example. Libel defamation suits fly fast and furious every day. Here, that protection has been huge, and it's really hard to win against a big media. I don't see four votes there. Trump, who knows, but they might push for it. But I don't see four. When I say four votes, I don't see four votes to take up the issue. It is it's up there with maybe the five most, we think of it anyway, canonical cases in Supreme Court history. New York Times versus Sullivan. Are you kidding? No,
Well, Roe
I'm not
versus Wade,
kidding.
we look
They
what
may
happened.
go for it, but I
Yeah,
believe
but
this one, even in a nightmare parade of horribles, this one is staying where it is.
we've seen Trump threatening state governments with withholding funds if they don't do what he likes on this issue or another. And Alan has a question about Trump's just today talking about changing voting rules. Voting, we don't have an election in this country. We have thousands of elections. So the question is, what kind of tools can he legitimately constitutionally use once again to get the states to knuckle under and do what he wants them to do when it comes to elections, to voting identification, his big obsession with voter fraud, which of course is virtually non-existent?
So great question. And let me just say the substance of that executive order is horrifying. And like everything else, it is, as Pat just said, based on a lie. There's not big fraud in this country. Does he have the power and will it stand up? As the question sort of suggests, elections and in the Constitution, states are supposed to run them. And to the extent there were federal power here, it would have to be in Congress. The executive, remember, it takes care that the laws be fairly executed. And he wasn't even purporting to sort of strengthen existing laws. He was just making stuff up that's right now in the SAFE Act. We're expecting Congress to introduce it. It passed the House last year. It's so nasty because again, based on a lie, and everyone knows it would way disproportionately disenfranchise Democrats. I don't see the Supreme Court. I don't see this being upheld. Although it might sort of dovetail with what the Congress is trying to do, but in general, the theme of what he's doing again and again, closing down agencies, et cetera, is kind of one to aggregate in the executive all legislative power. This is what Congress does and his own. And come on, if the federal government has a role here, it would not be the president who just enforces the law. And I think even if Congress, we'll see, they have this act that might go, about federal elections. They say it's only federal elections and certain requirements. And I think that's touch and go whether that would be upheld. But coming from the president, I just can't see it. And some of these things like birthright citizenship, you think are sacrificial lambs to make, because they're not going to win, and maybe it makes the other ones seem more likely. But I don't know who advised him to do this. This wasn't expected. It is super bad news, and I think it's unconstitutional.
We have a lot of questions. Let's keep going here with Steve, who says, look, Trump's already snubbed a Supreme Court order on TikTok, right? So isn't this kind of, the established territory for him? Well, if I can get away with this, what's to stop me from doing that?
Well, that is the big question. I would say deflected rather than snubbed on TikTok, and that's in general. He's doing it in Boasberg, different kinds of bobbing and weaving, but where the battle isn't truly joined of, as Andrew Jackson was reputed to have said, but a little nerdy point here, he never did say it. The Chief Justice has made a decision, let the Chief Justice enforce it. They haven't yet drawn the line. In fact, his lip speaks continues to be like that he would comply, but it's only been 2 months. So anyway, obviously he's capable of it, right? So, but we haven't gotten there yet, and I can imagine political forces, including losing hugely in the midterms, et cetera, that would cow him. But he's perfectly capable of it, which means we are, at the precipice, sort of full time now, of a constitutional crisis.
Ellen has a question back to the birthright citizenship matter too, and it seems as if the Trump administration is throwing everything at the wall judicially and constitutionally the way it's done in other circumstances before. That if you throw enough troops at this, enough bad or good or marginal cases, something is going to make its way through. Is that the thinking?
It sure seems good. I've long since given up trying to psychoanalyze Donald Trump, but that's Project 2025, right? I mean, a whole big part of it is shock and awe. That's their term. Just throw things up again and again and again. Now, if Ellen means they're doing that with birthright citizenship, different legal arguments, people do that when they're trying to defend something. And I don't think it will carry the day. But I think if I hear her right, or my understanding is they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. This just came up to me a couple days ago. Remember when they pardoned the January 6th offenders? That was what? 15 years ago, and it was completely mind-blowing. So he's done, would you call it effective? Certainly noteworthy job of just throwing stuff again and again and again this week, three times
And
this
now
week.
he's talking about reparations for the January 6th.
Right. Can you imagine? And anybody who worked on those cases, the biggest operation in the history of Department of Justice, a point of pride. We saw these are marauders and violent people who tried to keep the sine qua non, if I can get more Yiddish, from of peaceful transfer of power from happening. Anyone who even worked on those cases, has to be somehow removed in 1984 style. It's revolting.
And certainly doesn't serve us
And
abroad.
I'll say one more thing, which is I happen to know within the Department of Justice, everybody fears and loathes the administration and Pam Bondi. Oh, the career people. That big speech he was
Demoralizing.
at, the whole audience was handpicked political types. Career people couldn't even come unless a few were invited.
So demoralizing as well as
And afraid, and it'd be nice if we were only demoralized. People are having their lives upended.
there was a question about the constitutionality of the administration claiming that the legislatively established nonprofit Institute of Peace is part of the executive branch, and therefore they could unilaterally shut it down and pick whom they chose to run it. And this is kind of a test case for how it's been gutting congressionally established agencies across the board as well. And then to my way of thinking, is it a kind of incursion into nonprofits in general, that look what we can do to agencies that we don't like, that claim nonprofit status? We can persecute them with the IRS. We can take over their boards.
Yeah, forgive me if I'm not totally on top of it, but I don't think I think all the things you're talking about, Pat, of a piece, but we're talking about the NLRB and the FCC and other things that are true independent agencies, and a whole theme here is an attack on those. I think the Institute of Peace was no way. They just barged in, as if they were holding up a 7-Eleven. I don't really think there's an argument that that's part of government, and they, were just throwing their weight around. So I see that as just a banditos kind of operation. But the broader theme of trying to get at agencies, and especially the point of attack is any agency, so-called independent agency, what does that mean? The president is fettered to some degree in whether he can fire them. There's a long-standing U.S. Supreme Court opinion that says at least if there are multiple people atop it as opposed to a single person, and they're not exercising too much power, to oversimplify, it's okay and constitutional. Everybody understands that Supreme Court case is really possibly on the block. They might overrule the Humphreys executor case, and then that would mean a complete sea change in the administrative state as we know it. It would mean that a new guy comes in like Trump and just completely gets rid of everybody, installs lackeys. I mean, the watchword of those agencies has been expertise and political insulation, because you need both those things. And you really do. If you're, I understand the ungainliness constitutionally or the argument, but that's like, we crossed that in the New Deal. And that's what we have. This if they're able to make that attack stick. And my best guess is this one that they will win. The Supreme Court is ready to overrule that case. That will have really on the ground, day-to-day consequences for everybody, because we won't have any more agencies acting impartially and with particular expertise. Instead, they'll just be bossed around by the president.
We have questions from along the same lines, Rossi, Donald, and a few others, essentially that how the administration deals with duly constituted agencies, or even say the Postal Service, which predates the Constitution. And again,
is that right? I didn't know that. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Ben Franklin was on
Articles of Confederation Post Office on our way.
And it may even have been, pre-1776. I'll have to look into that. But the idea that the Congress is not defending its own institution, its own power, the institutions it created, or its own self and its own authority, seems to be alarming people, certainly our viewers, as much as really anything else that Trump is doing. The supine Congress here.
I really agree. Alarming is a weak word. It's sort of disgusting. I mean, you can think of Donald Trump as a kind of weird force of nature who comes around every 30 years, maybe, and he showed
Like
up.
locusts?
And right, exactly. And different comparisons with Mussolini and Hitler, et cetera, which we can get into. I no longer think they are off limits. But man, oh man, I'm going back to Shonda, the Republican. Say, I do think one day, my best guess, maybe we'll talk about this at the end, Pat, is we will prevail. And then at the other end of things, there'll be the equivalent of sort of Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And what the hell? How were you standing up and telling the American people the election was stolen? Starting back then, you have all these election deniers, but even today, that they completely, lie supine and say, run over me, sir, please. And it's not the way it's supposed to run. That's clear. But it's such a disservice to the American people that check, and especially when things they're doing are outlandish and, based in lies. And each and every one of them are just cowardly, in collective, and, just willing to they've made a deal. We won't do these things that everyone hates so much. We'll let you do it, Mr. Maximum Leader, and then we won't be accountable. Of course, the worm is turning, right? You've seen these town halls where they're told that's the official response. Don't show up to town halls. Don't be responsive to your constituents, but they're there anyway. But I really think these are grown-ups who should know better. At least 50% of them are.
We're almost out of time, and I think
I'm sorry.
Right that people in Congress are beginning to see that if they do turn against Trump, they may have more support than they believe. But Deborah, before we get to our optimistic ending, really need a short answer to this. Deborah's question about what you think is the most significant story out of Washington in the past few days, given that there's a lot of competition.
I gotta say the executive order on voting, it's I hope it'll go down, but it's so big and so bad. And if it does go down, they'll do other stuff. It could really affect our democracy big time.
So we do have a couple of minutes, and we'd like you to, to wax a little optimistic. Where
Yeah.
do you see some hope, and where you think people can do something? Because I think you're right. People are energized. They just want to know where to focus their energies.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm not just, making this up. You told me this is how you end. This is how I would end. Look, there are a lot of things that have happened, and very, very quickly. The Reichstag fire was a month after Hitler became chancellor. That's the only sort of time period I can see that really do look like, wow, we've already. It's not a break glass moment anymore. It's the fire's going. But what you think about, you try to think about analogies and persuade people, it could happen. Democracies do, in fact, eventually, end. But the thing about we think about Hungary, we think about Chile, etc., but we start with such a stronger base, such a stronger kind of cultural commitment to constitutionalism and democracy and the rule of law. And even if you think about Trump, whose support grew and he got just at the cusp of 50. I think maybe 20% of the 20% of the American electorate would go with him wherever he says, over a cliff. But I just think a lot of people think, it would never happen. So when they see it happening, when we're really talking about the real life, holy cow, end of the American experiment, welcome to Hungary, I think in our bones since first grade are, no, that is not what this country is. And we don't care about the short-term things you say you're going to do. We will stand up against that. And I really think it's it's the depth of the cultural commitment that makes
It's kind of a ballast, a patriotic ballast, I think, in a sense,
stronger
of
than
democracy.
not
And
impossible to topple, but a lot harder. That's where my hope is. What can people do? Do you want me to, do I have a second to speak to that?
Please, yes. I'm
Okay.
so sorry.
First, I know it's hard. Some people aren't, taken to the riot lines or whatever. First, it's always a lie at the core. You can call out the lies in your own town hall. That would mean your Thanksgiving dinner or your workplace, calmly, whatever. It's like, no, that happens to be false. No, that's not national. That's for starters. You can keep informed. And there is a whole channel now. I don't want to end with self-promoting. I'm one of several that there's now a kind of, on the newer media of Substack and YouTube, a community is really forming there of people who are building together. Community is basically the key here. Same with the law firms, same here, banding together. And even if on an individual level, it's just keeping your voice, with it and being strong, at least about all the lies. I think that's a pretty big start.
We have a tremendous opportunity coming up on the 250th anniversary of the country in July for people to show their colors and to rally around what they think this country is. And I think, and I'm hoping that we will have you back again, Harry Litman, to talk as these events inevitably unfold. We know what direction they're going. We just don't know how they're going to turn out at the end.
That's true.
So
Thanks, Pat. It
so
was really a lot of fun for me.
Well, thank you again. We want people to support these programs like yours. You can be found on Substack, and support for this program. You'll see more information on the screen in a moment. We want to thank all of our viewers and listeners. And of course, this program will be archived online so you can watch it again at your leisure and invite your friends. I'm Patt Morrison. Thank you for being here.